This guy is super smart when it comes to politics. Gary Dietrich is really amazing. He's our former KGO colleague, and he has reported across the CBS television stations on California politics and beyond, and on iHeartRadio. He is their political analyst. He joins us on Mondays. How about it for the great Gary Dietrich, everybody? Hi, Gary.
Hey, Mark.
Listen, I want to start with I'll get to Ukraine and all and where we are from a foreign policy standpoint. I'll get to that. But I want to start to exploit a real expertise of yours, because you are there in Sacramento and you're seeing it all. And Gavin Newsom, who, you know, many kind of look at him as maybe the future of the Democratic Party on some level. I mean, he speaks very well. He understands the issues very well. He has the same hypocrisy as all the other politicians. But he's now doing something that kind of involves reaching out. And I wonder if you can get into a little bit. He's kind of embraced the new media.
Well, you know, I think the hard lesson for Democrats last fall, one of the hardest of all, was the nature of the new media. You know, every few election cycles now, Mark, something new, mainly revolving around the evolution of technology, has transformed campaigns. It started, by the way, with contributions, when famously Howard Dean started raising tens of millions of dollars online in these tiny contributions. Then Bernie Sanders perfected that and raised remarkable amounts of money through little tiny contributions. Obama did the same thing, took it to another level. And so that was on the contribution side. But then on the messaging, the communication side, one of the biggest recriminations that Democrats have been looking at in terms of their $1 billion raised by the Biden/Harris campaign, but where that money went was the amazing reach of podcasts. Most famously, of course, the Joe Rogan 3-hour Donald Trump podcast that got over 100 million views. And of course, Kamala Harris famously did not go on that podcast. So what has Gavin Newsom done? Last week announced he is starting a new podcast called This is Gavin Newsom. Now, why I think this is significant, not only, of course, does it immediately signal to people that 28 is just around the corner for him in terms of his attention, but also I think interesting is the way he's going to do this, Mark. And I think this is going to raise a lot of hackles even in his own party, because he says he's going to be very heavy on guests, not just Gavin. And a lot of these guests he announced last week are going to be MAGA people. And they said, well, who are you talking about? He said, well, look at the lineup of CPAC this week. So he plans to do kind of double down what he did with Ron DeSantis, remember, on Fox News when they had that famous debate between the two of them. And he plans to bring on not only key Democrats to sort of do a big, giant introspection on where we go from here, but bring on Republicans, as he says, take them on, but have a respectful dialogue. So we'll see how this plays. But it's a pretty gutsy move when you think about it, for a Democrat to say, I'm going to bring on and give high profile opportunities for my major political opponents.
Yeah, you're right. It is. And I think Newsom has got the chops to pretty much argue with anybody on the merits. I mean, he's very good in the debate. And so if you had a conversation maybe with, you know, a Charlie Sykes or whomever, it might be something that would be great to listen to, and it might be elucidating. I mean, you might learn something. I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's such a bad idea. And as you say, it sort of reflects the inadequacies of this last campaign, at least in the general. I mean, that they really didn't lean in aggressively enough to new media. I love that you mention how the Democrats spent money, because they had so much money, and I thought they were wasting it. And I was astounded at how effectively the GOP put the Musk money and all the other fundraising that they had. They have deep pockets there on the GOP side as well. They put that into some really well-crafted, we talked about them before, television campaigns and TV media buys, but they also played, of course, the new media. I just felt that when you actually saw the breakdown the New York Times did on how the Democrats spent money, you know, putting concerts and appearance fees for, you know, Beyonce, et cetera. What a waste. I mean, it's an absolute waste, man. We're not putting on the best concert. We're trying to turn out voters.
Right. Right. And I think what's going to be interesting is not only does this sort of open up, I think, the new media to the Democrats, which they knew they needed to do, But there is the Democrats themselves are saying, who is the voice of our party, right? I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges in the next 21 months is crafting a set of messages and getting some voices out there for the midterms. If the Democrats want to, as I think I mentioned last week, their the lowest hanging fruit is to get a half a dozen seats in the House and then take back control of the fund development strategy, which is basically budgeting has to start in the House of Representatives. If you want to get control of that, the biggest lever of power, which is federal budgeting, you've got to get control of the House. And so I think Newsom's going to be one of those voices. He's clearly positioning himself that way. And you just have to ask, who else is out there? I mean, Obama and Clinton showed themselves not to be the kind of sort of powerful voices that I think Democrats hoped they would be. Chuck Schumer is kind of getting ready to move into the limelight. Out of the limelight, I should say. And of course, Nancy Pelosi has really stepped out of it. So they're looking for new voices. Maybe this is going to be it.
I'm going to leave Newsom and get to sort of national, international politics in a second. But just because we're mentioning Newsom, and California has been through so much with the wildfires, et cetera, and the build back is going to be a huge, difficult climb. And even as they're building back, we're learning about what happened with LAFD, the fire department in Southern California, et cetera. So leaving aside those issues that are associated with blame, now we're just talking about building back. Newsom is saying, hey, we're going to fast track a lot of this build back. So that I know you guys are looking at decades, but we don't think it'll be that long necessarily.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit last week about the spotlight of the Olympics coming in 3.5 years to LA, and how, LA is going to be under a microscope, and therefore politics are right before the 28 presidential campaign. I don't think it's an accident. The Newsom already has waived a lot of CEQA, that is California Environmental Quality Act requirements, as well as Coastal Commission build back requirements. And now he stretched that just 2 days ago, Mark, into the prevention side. So in the prevention space, he said, we're going to waive CEQA and the Coastal Prevention Act for things like vegetation and tree removal, building buffer zones, which basically means devegetating strips of land in heavily forested or vegetated areas to help with fire suppression. And also, in terms of just the basics of what we call fire prevention fires, right? I mean, they have fires that they set intentionally in order to reduce undergrowth. And those have been really restricted by environmental regulations. So this is going to make a lot of people in the environmental community unhappy. His edicts over the weekend, his executive actions, but he's also going to Congress in Washington asking for $40 billion for the build back in LA. And in order to do that, it's clear there's going to have to be some changes in California policies. The feds have already said so. And so here we go.
Yeah, they want to see some movement in California in terms of the way things are done and how the build back goes down. So that same government that wants all of the want us to show our math in California about how we're going to build back after these horrible fires, devastating fires, that same government is ready to pull the plug on Ukraine. Now we are pivoting toward Russia, it would seem. I mean, I'm kind of rounding it off and softening it up. I mean, it's a hard turn that he's made to Putin. Can you put this in some context for us?
Yeah, I'll tell you, here's what I think is going to be the most significant part of this. I mean, the dust up between Zelensky and Trump. I mean, I think all of us watched that in shock. I tell you, it's amazing to me, Mark, the change in the political appetite of the average person. I literally was trying to sneak in a workout Friday afternoon when my phone blew up, of course, and I had to run into CBS for our evening shows. But watching a middle-aged woman I'm just trying to do my warm down after weights, and there's a point to this story. And she's sitting in the jacuzzi in my gym, with the co-ed jacuzzi, with that on her phone. Now, that is unprecedented stuff, right? I mean, just sitting there in the gym watching this whole thing go down. People are engaged as I have never seen them in this. That's just sort of on the personal American level. Now, on the strategic international level, that rare minerals deal is going to get signed. I have no doubt it's probably going to happen, through back channels. It will be far less glitzy than what we saw on Friday. But I think that rare earth minerals deal is going to happen between Ukraine and U.S. That will be a good thing for both sides eventually. But to me, the most significant thing out of the weekend is what's happening in Europe. And that was the Sunday conclave in London with all the European leaders and Zelensky and Macron calling for the first time, basically what was sort of a Trumpian call, but Macron saying, we've got to get the 3% GDP of our budgets for European defense. I mean, I think Europe at this juncture, this to me is the tipping point. What happened in Friday in Washington and what happened yesterday in London with the European leaders, I think Europe has decided, you know what, we've got to take on Ukraine as Europe, and we've also got to put together a stronger European defense that starts with each one of us committing to 3% of GDP and then bringing that together to create, I don't think we're anywhere close to a European defense force. Some are asking for that, but certainly a much more coordinated, much more robust, much more muscular European defense than we have seen perhaps ever in our lifetimes.
Yeah, they put their money where their mouth is on this, and a considerable amount of money at that. If America de facto pulls out of NATO, and I say de facto because it feels as though right now, I don't know that America would ride to the rescue of a NATO nation, another NATO nation that was involved in some confrontation with Russia, for example. I mean, it seems like, but I mean, that might be a big stretch. Please, stay with me. I just see our disposition toward NATO being one of, arms crossed and, work it out yourselves.
Well, I do think, I'm glad you qualified that, Mark, because I truly don't think that, for example, if one of the other bordering countries, including the new ones, Finland, Sweden, others, Poland, if those were attacked by Russia, I don't think that U.S. would just sit back on that. I don't think that's the case. But I think more significantly is that I think the nature of the NATO defense structure, in other words, I think NATO has always been primarily U.S. led. Despite the fact that almost all the nations are on the other side of the Atlantic, with the exception of us, right? And you've also got Canada that figures into that. But most of it's been European, based on European soil. I think the change is going to be this, and it's what I was kind of referring to about what came out of London yesterday. I think it's going to be more European led. I think there's going to be greater investment by European countries. I certainly think that Britain, France, and then to a little bit lesser degree, Germany are going to be the leaders of it. And they are going to, basically rally the troops, so to speak, and sort of pun intended in Europe and say, okay, we're going to take the lead on NATO with the U.S. sort of, and you've been hearing this the last 2 weeks, sort of taking a a sort of backstop role, Well, listen, we're behind you guys, but we're not going to be out in front. It needs to be you. And then we will certainly be there if needed, but in a more secondary role. I think right now, at least, that is what looks like is trending.
A depressed Canadian says to you, Ukraine giving up its mineral wealth will not be good for both sides. No security guarantees. It's being extorted. The only one who benefits are Trump's Russian backers. It is true that the one sticking point, and it seemed to be a sticking point in that conversation that I couldn't believe they were having, in front of the cameras about, specifics in this deal, is the security guarantee. That's really the only inducement I would think that that Zelensky has to make this deal.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Well, it's also to keep in the good graces of, billions of dollars that they'd still like to continue to receive, both in terms of military and economic aid. But I think the security piece of it is clearly NATO's going to figure into that, as we just talked about. I think the U.S. will figure into it. But it's not just American military security guarantees. As I referenced last week on the show, Mark, it's also just a presence of Western companies in there helping or either conducting or assisting with or partnering in the mining, the transportation of those minerals. Why is that significant? Because when you put economic assets in a foreign country, you want to protect those, right? I mean that's sort of by definition. You don't want the investment, the capital investment, and then Putin's going to take those away. So the security guarantees are both direct in terms of American military might and American military aid, but it's also indirect in terms of protecting economic assets. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, in fact, it speaks to the integral nature of those economic assets. Exactly. Silicon Valley Block says, I feel completely sober listening to Dietrich, even though I'm not. You do have a way of kind of chilling us out a little bit, even as the madness of Washington continues to get madder. This is interesting. Kick us out of NATO and let Ukraine in. I mean, the reality is, though, thank you, Phineas, for that. America is critical to NATO. NATO is what it is because of the United States of America.
Oh, well, the U.S. is, I really don't think the U.S. is going to back out of NATO. I think that would be, I think there's enough people, even in the current Trump administration, who believe we need to have a strategic role. And frankly, a guy like a Marco Rubio really believes that, for the simple reason that we, in his view, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with Europe, shoulder to shoulder with NATO, in order to block a Sino-Soviet, as they used to call it in the past, but now it's Russian-Chinese, move geopolitically. I think that's the larger strategic. I don't like to use the word play in a any kind of a derogatory or diminutive way, but the larger geopolitical objective in this is to prevent a Chinese-Russian attempt to begin to take over the world stage. I mean, there's just no getting around that's the larger, that is the lens through which people like Rubio and people on the Democratic side too, by the way, it's not just Republicans, people in those Senate Foreign Relations committees believe that also as well.
No one will invest without a security guarantee, says Sports Hatch. Yeah, and this is back on the Newsom stuff. Rule of thumb, says CC Ryder, only give your enemy a platform if you have diligently prepared effective counter attempts to counter arguments to kneecap their lies and propaganda. No counter allows the lies to sell. It's dangerous, she says.
Well, I think there is a realization. Let's just take California as a sort of test case of where we're at. And you can ascribe it to climate change. You can put whatever you want to say. But the reality is, you look at the last half dozen years in California, the devastating fire in Northern California in Paradise. Okay. Then you go to the Caldor fire up in the Lake Tahoe area that almost completely came a hair's breadth away from consuming all of South Lake Tahoe. Okay. Then you, of course, go now to most recently LA. These are all marked just in the last 6 years. Okay. And they are tens of billions of dollars of damage. What I'm getting at is California and the West has to find different strategies. There's got to be more money invested on the prevention side as well as on the suppression side, because you just cannot absorb these kind of economic as well as human cost body blows. I mean, those deadly fire in California's history up in Paradise, right? The most economically devastating in LA just months ago. You can't do these every couple of years, right? I mean, it's just not possible to absorb those, and nobody wants to. And then you pile on top of that the California homeowners insurance crisis, which is just right now beginning to fully blossom, rate increases of 20 to 30% in a year. I mean, you can't, this is not sustainable over the long term. So I think Newsom is saying, okay, look, we're going to have to do some things differently. And if it means looking at some of our environmental regulations or whatever differently, I think that's what he's currently experimenting with politically.
Yeah, that's a really great summary of the predicament that California finds itself in. And by the way, it's instructive for other parts of the country. Florida finds itself in the same predicament, and even parts of coastal eastern portions of this nation find themselves in the same predicament, and the Gulf states beyond just Florida. So, yeah, California is maybe the tip of the spear, but there is definitely a lot more going on here. I also think that, just to wrap up, it might be quite listenable to hear Newsom talk about some of these things to which you've referred. I mean, I think these are issues that Californians want to hear about. And sometimes in a longer form format, you can sense the disposition of a leader toward certain things, or a politician, or, a legislator. towards certain things that you don't get in a statement from the governor's office. You know what I mean?
No, I think you're exactly right, Mark. And, beyond the politics of it, I mean, people either love or hate Newsom, just like they do most state and national politicians. Some are going to see this as nothing more than a crass political move for 28. But I look at it as sort of you're implying, Mark, potentially an opportunity. How many places outside of, I mean, even inside Washington, sadly now, do you get both sides together to just say it, debate an issue, right? I mean, you got the echo chambers on either side. You got Fox News and MSNBC, and I'm not sure exactly where CNN ends up sometimes these days. And the other, I mean, where is it happening? Despite Joe Rogan getting one person sitting down, you know what I'd like to suggest to Rogan? Do more of the crosstalk thing, right? Get both sides and sit them down in front of you for a couple hours. Let's see where that goes. I frankly think we need more of that.
Yeah. I think that's very well put. You can find Gary across the CBS television stations in California and beyond, and also across the radio and media reach of iHeartRadio. He is the political analyst for both. We love talking to you, pal. You do chill us out somehow. I don't know. I feel like you talk me off the ledge every week, so thank you for that.
Okay, well,
we'll see you next time, bud. Thank you.
All
right, Gary Dietrich, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.